Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Coffee. Without it, we would never have had the Industrial Revolution. We'd all be still living in Europe in mud huts. Here in Laredo, we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike. 4501 McPherson, the best coffee on the planet. If you can't get to Laredo, you can order from the Organic Man Coffee Trike.shop. And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Remember, October 9th, from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m., I will be at the Phoenix Bookstore, 1602 Victoria, here in Laredo. I'll be telling tales from my book, Paranormal Laredo. If you'd like a signed copy of one of my books, or you just want to sit back, drink some coffee and listen, come on by. It's October once again. All the cool movies are on TV. Folks are acting strange. Time for some stories to get you in the mood for Halloween. Last year, during the Black Plague of 2020, I put on a good show. I set my table out in the driveway and I had 5 big bags of candy ready for the visitors. There were some kids out trick-or-treating. Many of the parents thanked me for being there. The kids were happy to not be totally disappointed. I had 45 kids come by. I counted. Just as the sun was going down, I was handing out hands full of candy to each kid. I was left with 3 big bags of candy. I'm hoping this year will make up for it. I started decorating 2 weeks ago. I always wanted my own cemetery, and now I have one. The TARDIS is sitting in the middle of a bunch of tombstones. Last year I did a lot of scary stories, mostly from the U.S. and Great Britain. I think I might have done 1 or 2 from Canada. Having listeners from all over the planet, I'm going to tell some strange things from other parts of the world. Tonight, I'm focusing on India. I will definitely mispronounce many names and words. If you catch me saying Hindi words wrong, just remember, I have a hard time with English, and I've been speaking it just about my entire life. There are several languages spoken in the subcontinent. Punjabi, Gujarati, Telugu, and a bunch more. Not so much languages as dialects. This makes trying to pronounce some of these names just that much harder. A lot of college kids from India come to the U.S. for studies. To me, anybody, no matter their age, who is in college is a kid. I think you become an adult just about the time you're ready to retire. Maybe not even then. I seem to be acting more childish every day. Halloween started becoming popular in India as more college kids returned home with stories of having attended a Halloween party here in the U.S. The places where these folks go to work and wind up having Halloween parties, which leads to other people wanting to participate. It's slowly catching on. In newspapers in India, you can find pumpkin recipes. Discotheques in some of the cities organize huge Halloween nights, and Bollywood is still talking about Hrithik Roshan's Halloween party. Many of the famous actors dress up to look like scary creatures from movies. As far as I can tell, the celebrations seem to be mostly older people, no kids dressing up and ringing doorbells. Soon, I hope, they'll start the whole door to door ringing bells and throwing toilet paper. Of course, TPing a house these days is not so much fun. All the TP shortages that nobody can explain takes the fun away. It sucks when the people whose house you just hit come out and thank you. Halloween isn't the only time creatures lurk about the country looking for victims to prey on. As the 31st draws closer, the barrier between this world and the other grows thinner, allowing more things to slip through. I'm trying to get Walpurgis Night as a second yearly event. This would give us a cool celebration every 6 months. In West Bengal, they have the Aleya Ghost Lights. It is believed these lights are the spirits of fishermen who lost their lives. These ghosts are said to inhabit swamps, and they throw unsuspecting victims off of the safe path into impenetrable darkness, drawing them in the murky depths of the water to drown them. Locals have shared unsettling stories about the Aleya Ghost Lights, and most of them end in very bad ways. The Sundarbans is said to be one of the places where the Aleya Ghost Lights live and prey upon those who dare to venture out in the darkness. The Sundarbans is a mangrove swamp in the delta formed by the confluence of the Ganges, Brahmaputra, and Meghna rivers in the Bay of Bengal. Legends speak of dead bodies of fishermen that have washed up on shore. These bodies look as if not only have they been drained of life, but all color as well. Investigations have never found out why these men drowned. On occasions, the bodies were never identified. The Aleya lights are blamed for either luring people to their deaths by getting them lost, or by directly attacking people and sucking the life out of them. Anyone, either fishing or sailing through the delta at night, runs the risk of becoming a victim of these lights. The Sundarbans is not the only location where you might have an encounter. The lights hang out in just about every swampy area in India. The National Library in Kolkata, in West Bengal, is considered to be one of the most haunted places in the area. Libraries contain thousands, even millions of books. Words can hold power or energy. Just look at any magic incantation. The words used have to be exact and in the proper order. Words are used to create or destroy things. Having millions of words all crammed together in one place could be like having a bomb or two sitting on a shelf waiting to be released. Of course, this would depend on the subjects written in the books. This might just explain why so many libraries were destroyed in the past by conquering armies. Maybe they feared what was written in them. People can get lost in a good book, and this can lead to something akin to a tulpa being formed. A tulpa is a concept in theosophy and mysticism, as well as the paranormal world of a being or object which is created through spiritual or mental powers. Modern practitioners use the term to refer to a type of willed, imagined being which practitioners consider to be sentient and relatively independent. A lot of people, all thinking about the same imaginary being, just might bring it into existence. The National Library started out being the Belvedere House during the Raj, when Britain ruled the country. It was among the many buildings Mir Jafar built in Alipur in the 1760s after he was forced to abdicate his throne in Murshidabad. He gifted the house to the first Governor General of India, Lord Warren Hastings. What happened to the house, as well as in it, between 1780, when Hastings is said to have sold it, and 1854, when it became the official residence of the Lieutenant Governor of Bengal, is unknown. From 1854 to 1911, Belvedere housed a number of lieutenant governors until the British capital shifted to Delhi. After independence, the National Library was moved to the Belvedere House. People have said they see the spirit of Lady Metcalfe, the daughter of the Viceroy of India, in the library. This ghost is dressed in a fancy style used by the Brits that lived in India in the early 1900s. People in the library have reported having someone watching them, sometimes breathing down their necks while they're sitting and reading. The staff working late at night or early in the morning when the library is closed have seen chairs being pulled out from tables. Sometimes the tables move as well. They also hear pages being flipped back and forth and books being dropped on the floor or the tables. If the staff member goes to look, they find nothing out of place, just mysterious sounds. When the house was slated for restoration, the books were relocated to a newer building during reconstruction. As work was being done, they found a hidden room nobody had known about. The room had no opening to it, as if someone from the past had sealed it to keep it secret. Stories began to spread that this room had been used as either a torture chamber or a cell to hold those that the British wanted to punish or kill. An oubliette, only in a more modern time. The oubliette is a French term coming from the verb oublier, or to forget. It was so named because a prisoner was thrown down into one and then forgotten about. These were built in medieval castles and only accessible through a trap door with no exit. Finding one hidden room has led to folks thinking there might be other secret places in the library, and maybe some of these hold treasures. Here in the U.S., we have a common theme of hauntings happening when housing is built on Indian, that's feather, not dot, burial grounds. Not everyone in India is cremated after death. Hindu tradition uses cremation to sever the bonds of the deceased so they can move on to their next life. There are many religions in India, and some don't cremate the dead. They wind up being buried in one of the many cemeteries. The history of South Park Street Cemetery is closely connected with the reconstruction of Calcutta after its recapture from the Nawab of Bengal. Many of those buried were British folks either killed in battle or who died from disease or mistreatment. Many people who moved from the calm climate of England found the weather and the climate a lot different in India. Being surrounded by folks with little-known diseases, the city folks would soon become sick and die. Following the completion of Old Fort William, a church named St. Anne's was consecrated in 1709. The church faced the east gate of the old fort. Its extensive grounds already held a two-story octagonal tomb of Job Carnac, who had died in 1693. Job Carnac was an English administrator with the East India Company. This is the earliest known English funeral structure in the city, and it is surrounded by flat tombstones of the first Calcutta inhabitants. Some of these inscriptions are in Latin. There's not much good to be said about the East India Company. Slavery, abuse, murder, drug running. They did not behave well while ruling and ruining the lives of those in far distant countries. Following Carnac's consolidation of three small villages to form the basis of Calcutta, the East India Company created a successful trading post. The Nawab of Bengal resented and feared this expansion by the foreigners, hence his attack on the city. The proximity of St. Anne's Church was exploited by Siraj ud Doula's soldiers, who could fire directly into the fort from the openings in the steeple. The fort was captured in June 1756 after some fierce fighting. The Mahratta ditch, dug some 40 years earlier around the city as a defensive measure against the Marathas and its numerous palisades, proved useless. The Nawab and his men simply marched down Chitpur Road and into Fort William. The bodies of those who died in the subsequent Black Hole incident were thrown unceremoniously by the Nawab's men into a defensive but useless ditch. Everyone captured in the fort was shoved into a hot 14 by 18-foot cell. 64 soldiers, British and Indian, went in together, and no distinctions were made. By the next morning, there were 43 dead. The other 21 were close to death as well from heat and a lack of water. After Robert Clive's recapture of Calcutta, radical plans were implemented to ensure the city would not fall into enemy hands again. Now, these plans were not just against the Indians, but the French and other British companies that were working out of India. St. Anne's Church had been badly damaged during the fighting. The church was torn down, and a Portuguese chapel inside the fort was used in its place. Those of importance who died during the recapture of Calcutta, like Admiral Watson, were buried next to Job Carnac's tomb. A lot of those killed in battle or in a direct result were buried in just about any location. Many wound up being interred in gardens all over the city. The Mahratta ditch, where all those bodies had been thrown, is believed to have followed the line of today's Lower Circular Road, and the new cemetery was built just inside the curve. The ditch had quickly become a dumping ground for rubbish and dead animals. The site chosen for the cemetery was some way from the heart of British Calcutta. It was approached through marshy land with bamboo and trees growing thick on either side of a raised path called the Burial Ground Road. Later, with the establishment of Deer Park by Sir Elijah MP, the road became known as Park Street. I wonder if Brian MP, who was on the show a few years ago, was any relation to Elijah. I'll have to ask him. Maybe he's listening to the show and he'll send me a message and tell me. He'll more than likely say he's never heard of the man. Because there was no church around which a graveyard could grow from, a decision was made to establish a new kind of burial ground, one which was not dependent on a place of worship and was far enough out of town so as to not pose any threat of contamination to the springs in Tank Square. Funerals would be conducted in whatever temporary room or borrowed chapel was available in central Calcutta. The funeral procession would proceed down Chowringhe before arriving at the cemetery. Funeral processions were conducted at night by torchlight, so the British inhabitants of Calcutta weren't distressed by the number and continuous deaths of their fellow countrymen. Like I said, all those British people living in India, they were getting sick right and left and falling over dead. Burials in 1768 tended to be jumbled together without any discernible pattern. Family graves would usually be placed next to each other, forming a distinct cluster of tombs. What's a clutcher? A cluster of tombs, but others appear to be placed in fairly random order. Cemeteries fill up first from the main entrance and where the oldest tombs are usually found. In this case, the entrance was on Park Street. Later, as more room was needed, the cemetery was extended both south and east, with another entrance on Rowden Road. These two extensions contain tombs in fairly regular rows, quite different from the haphazard arrangement in the original burial ground. Labor and materials were cheap. Those wishing to show how much they missed their dearly departed, as well as show off how much money they had, grave markers were huge and decorative, almost to the point of ridiculousness. So many violent deaths took place in India during the time, many folks wound up being buried who weren't ready to face death. But who really is? Many paranormal investigators say if a person dies with unfinished business, they are more likely to return as a ghost looking to finish whatever their last task was. Being a huge old cemetery, South Park drew many visitors. Those who walked among the tombs would see people standing around, dressed in old-style clothing. When they looked closer, the person would vanish. Some of these apparitions were dressed like soldiers. As stories of ghosts and spirits being seen spread through town, more people would go to see if they could spot something from the other side. The South Park Cemetery is right across the street from the North Park Cemetery. Then there's the Scottish Cemetery and the French Cemetery. With so many old tombs all in one place, it's no wonder folks are seeing odd things both day and night. I wonder why a spirit is so attached to a body that it will hang around long after the body is nothing but dust. Anytime a cemetery is moved or a building goes in on top of those still buried there, paranormal activity is going to happen. This does not bode well for the afterlife. If you pass on and spend the rest of your death looking at folks you don't know who wound up being buried next to you, maybe that's why folks want family plots, so they have somebody they can talk to in the afterlife that they know. Cremation is looking better all the time. 18th century Dutch cemetery in Crossem Bazaar has a characteristic double-storied tomb not dissimilar to that of an earlier Dutch settler in Norinda Cemetery in Dakar. At Chinsura, which changed hands several times between the Dutch and the English companies, there's an interesting mix of tombs which allow comparison between architecture of the two nations. Not until the English evangelical movement of the early 19th century do tombs start to shrink and become more humble, more Christian in their symbolism, and more homogeneous with those of other Europeans. By the time South Park closed to burials in 1830, tombs and grave markers were becoming less grandiose. The cemetery is filled with Egyptian style obelisks, Greek looking structures, giant brick and mortar death houses, making for an interesting and somewhat frightening view. Visitors often complain about a weird sensation of constant feeling of dizziness, which stays even after they leave the premises. A lot of people have fallen ill after visiting this cemetery. It is also believed that Yogi Babas used the corpses from the graves for witchcraft. Now, I don't know if that's the right group of people to say. The people they're referring to would be those practitioners of black magic. I always thought a yogi was just a wise man or a person who contemplated spirituality. If I'm making a mistake, let me know. St. John's Cemetery is near the old Madras Road in Bangalore. Many who have been there after dark have had a spooky encounter. A lot of people have spotted a figure lurking around the graves at night. It appears to be sort of human, but they're not sure what it really is. There have also been reports of people feeling uneasy as if someone is watching over them when in or near the cemetery. People avoid taking the road at night if they're driving alone for fear of encountering something spooky. As spooky as in suddenly having somebody sitting in the passenger seat. It's a very common story. They'll be driving past the old Madras Road Cemetery, St. John Cemetery, all alone. Suddenly, something or someone will appear to sit next to them in the passenger seat. Most of the people that have had this encounter are too afraid to turn and look. They simply keep driving, hoping that the thing will go away. The Towers of Silence in Mumbai are used for something akin to sky burial. The Towers of Silence are a Zoroastrian funeral tower that is the final resting place for the Parsis. Parsis, or Persians, are an ethno-religious group of Indian subcontinent whose religion is Zoroastrianism. Their ancestors migrated to the region to escape the Muslim conquest of Persia in the 7th century A.D. They are known for philanthropy and charitable works. According to ritual, their dead bodies are kept in the open top of the tower to be eaten by vultures. As the vultures feed on the dead and then fly away, they carry the souls away as well. The place remains deserted during the night, but folks passing by have complained about feeling uneasy. According to reports, there were a number of suicides that took place in a building nearby which is known as the Grand Parari Towers. It is believed that supernatural forces from this burial ground are responsible for those suicides. It is said that the ghosts of the dead are responsible for the suicides of many residents who live in a building near the burial towers. This sounds to me like misplaced fear. The folks being accused of causing suicides are the same people who were busy helping others while they were alive. Nishi Dak translates as the call of the dark in Bengali. The Nishi Dak is an insidious night spirit that calls out to its victims, using the voice of someone close to them. Once the person gets within reach, it takes their life. The Nishidok initially appears slightly far away, calling out in a voice that sounds like mother or their father or maybe even a grandparent. You would hear the voice of your wife or your husband calling to you. The victim, not knowing any better, begins to walk towards the sound of his closest relative or friend. This can happen in an old abandoned building or out in the countryside. Once the intended prey is far from help and in some isolated location, the monster springs and devours them. The one weakness of the Nishidok is that it can only call out your name 2 times. To avoid becoming a meal, wait until you hear your name called 3 times before walking off into the darkness. A witch used to roam the streets of the city of Bangalore, hunting for her prey. The witch would knock on the doors at night and try to lure men by calling out in a voice similar to that of the woman they loved, either their mother, their wife, a sister, or girlfriend. Hearing a familiar voice, the person would open the door and subsequently, after seeing the witch, they would die within the next 24 hours. This legend spread like wildfire, wreaking havoc in the city. Wildfire, not wildflowers. The legend spread like wildfire, wreaking havoc in the city. The locals found out a way to get rid of the witch. They started writing Nale Ba on the doors, or uttering the words from inside the house to ward off the evil spirit. Nale Ba literally means, come back tomorrow, in Kannada, Kannada. It looks or it sounds almost like Canada. The witch would leave when it saw Nala Ba written outside of the home. Apparently, this was the only way to send this evil being away. It was only a temporary reprieve. The witch would return, and the whole thing would have to be done again. Some of the older houses in Bangalore have Nali Ba written above the doors, having been painted or even carved into the wood. In Assam, locals have a deep-rooted fear of the Bak, B-A-A-K, a grotesque-looking creature that inhabits ponds and lakes. It kills its victims, and then it hides the body deep under the water. This malevolent spirit occupies isolated spots where few people venture and even fewer return. The Bak is notorious for its murderous nature. After killing the victim and hiding the body, it takes on the corpse's appearance and goes out in search of more prey. Many people won't know that the person they're with is not their family or friend until it's too late. It is said that the Bak carries its own soul in a pouch on a cord around its neck. If you can grab the pouch, you will have command of the Bak, making it your slave. This is not an easy thing to do, because the Bak will try to kill you as soon as you're close enough. The Bak sounds a lot like a ghoul. Ghouls eat dead bodies. Sometimes they make them dead before eating them. Once finished, the ghoul takes on the appearance of its last meal. The Mahini is a female ghost that viciously attacks couples. It haunts old wells, coconut trees, and forests in South India. The Mahini is said to be a spirit of a woman who killed herself without ever having known love. Embittered and vengeful, she now seeks to destroy the lives of happy couples. This spirit gives off a sort of aroma that puts people into a stupor. kind of like a sleeping gas. Some folks say the Mohini also has flames coming from her legs or feet. Valuvanad was a prominent feudal state in the late medieval times in Kerala. The area was also renowned for its cultural heritage and folklore, riddled with myths and stories of the supernatural and unnatural powers. Late one night, the local school teacher was walking home. As he was crossing the field, he could see a barrier up ahead that he didn't remember being there earlier. As he was getting close enough to see it was a wall of dirt, a voice came from out of the darkness. It said he was not the one the thing was waiting for, and he should go someplace else. The teacher had only heard about the Odeon recently when he had arrived in the village. He quickly walked in the other direction. Odeons were professional killers hired by the community of landlords to assassinate their rival clans without leaving behind any evidence. The word Odi means to break, and Odeons operated by breaking the necks of the opponents, leaving no evidence of murder. During the older times in Kerala, these killings were orchestrated due to a rivalry and differences of opinion amongst the higher castes. In the feudal society of those times, the landed classes, those people that owned land, behaved very badly to their tenants and the working classes. Severe restrictions were imposed on the untouchable castes like the Pananas and the Polianas. Untouchables were the lowest folks in society, about the same level as a slave. These people, in turn, used to worship evil gods and engaged in Odeon Siva to gain unnatural powers. This gave them the power to assassinate their enemies and also to render services for their bosses for a price. Odeons were shapeshifters, assuming a different shape from their original. To do so, they prepared a paste made of a mix of different herbs and the remains of a human fetus, which they then applied to themselves in order to change their shapes. If you know anything about the werewolves of Europe, you'll remember the story of a man who used a paste in order to cause his body to transform into that of a werewolf. I might talk about him next week. Odeons can assume a shape of their choice. A buffalo, a dog, any kind of an animal. They then hide by the side of the road waiting for their victim. The Odeons took on a bizarre representation of every animal they were mimicking. They might look like a six-legged buffalo, or maybe a three-eyed dog, creatures that you wouldn't normally see. This anomaly would terrify the victim, who would become frozen with fright. The Odeon seized this opportunity to attack the victim and overpower him or her, breaking their neck and then slipping away. In an effort to combat the Odeons, the locals forbade lower caste people from going near pregnant women. This was to keep the women from being killed, to seize the fetuses that were needed to perform the transformation. I wonder how that worked with the lower class women. After all, they kind of lived in the same area together. I guess the higher-ups didn't consider them to be human or something like that. The Odeons also carry a poison with them. This was known as Plan B. If they failed in their primary attempt to kill the victim by breaking their neck, they would put the poison on the person's lips, and this would kill them. Kashmir has the ghost bridge of Gokadel. It is haunted by spirits from 1990. There was an uprising by the folks in Kashmir. The military was called out to put an end to this behavior. As things got out of hand, and they do any time the military is called in to deal with civilians, 160 people were killed, many dying on the bridge. The others were found in the surrounding area. The Gokadel pool that the bridge crosses is also haunted. Due to this huge massacre, the area has become cursed. Any time a person died from unnatural causes, such as murder or suicide, anywhere near the bridge, their soul would become trapped in the area around the pool. Evil entities, such as witches and evil spirits, are drawn to the area to absorb the energy trapped there. This energy is then used to create slaves from those trapped around the bridge. Folks walking by the pool or having to cross the bridge at night hear people crying out in pain. They also see wispy images that look like humans, only they're walking across the water. People driving over the bridge say they feel someone suddenly is sitting next to them. The driver feels as if they no longer can control the vehicle or themselves. This has led to several accidents, many involving death. Bodies have been found near the pool with no sign of what caused their death. Many believe these folks died from fright. They saw or felt something so terrifying it caused their hearts to stop. The area around Kuni Nadi, located near the center of Delhi in the Rohini district, has a weird problem. Kuni Nadi is a small stream surrounded by trees and green vegetation, and it is said to be haunted. It is believed that anyone who touches the water will get sucked into it. Over the years, people who went to the stream were later found dead. The authorities said they were all suicides, but those who knew the victims said most were not suicidal, if not all of them. To make matters worse, anyone dying near the water is destined to become a ghost, wandering the area around the stream. It is not a deep body of water, nothing close to the other streams around it, yet this one is where the spirits get trapped and people go to die. The Indian Institute of Technology in Kanpur campus is huge, covering 1,055 acres. The institute was established in 1959 with the assistance of a consortium of 9 U.S. research universities as a part of the Kanpur Indo-American program. Students go there to study all kinds of engineering, science, management, you name it. There is student housing on the campus, but there is one room nobody is allowed to rent. 2 students committed suicide in this room on 2 different occasions. There was no connection found other than the room itself. And not wanting any kinds of goings-on problem to get started, the folks running things had the room locked and put off limits to everyone. The students with rooms near this death room have heard weird sounds coming from inside late at night. It sounds as if somebody's in there banging around, moving things, making strange noises. One student who was passing the room heard what sounded like someone trying to open the door. He stopped and looked at the knob. It was turning back and forth as if someone or something was trying to get out. Kuldhara is a village situated in Jaisalmer in the district of Rajasthan. The village was established around the 13th century. The Brahmins, the highest caste in India, lived in this village, growing rich over the years. The Brahmins are the caste from which Hindu priests are drawn, and they're responsible for teaching and maintaining sacred knowledge. In 1815, one of the village wells dried up, causing a water shortage. This led to some crop failures. The local government increased the taxes to make up for the reduced income from the sale of crops. This did nothing to endear the rulers with those under them. 1850, people began to leave the village when the other well dried up as well. The local ruler had noticed a young girl in the village, and he decided he wanted her for his very own. The family, hearing about his intentions, packed up and left in the dead of night. By 1890, there were only 37 people living in this large village. Eventually, the village was completely empty. And it stays that way because everyone around it knows that the place is haunted. The Delhi Paranormal Society decided to look into the stories coming from the folks living around the village. Nobody wanted to live in the village. They refused to even go there. The paranormal folks were sent in to prove there was nothing to be afraid of. The paranormal group brought in all their electrical equipment, and they spent about 6 hours late at night studying the village. They were not disappointed by what they found. The researchers saw phantoms moving around the village, shadows sneaking around from building to building. The researchers also would hear voices coming from some of the houses. When they would go to look, there was no one there. The electronics were showing all manners of paranormal activity. During a ghost box session, the researchers asked a bunch of questions, and they were recording the answers as they went. They would get the spirits' names. They would tell where in the village they had lived and when and how they had died. The digital thermometer registered sudden extreme temperature changes. The K2 meter kept going wild. The SLS camera, or the structured light sensor, it sends out thousands of laser beams, saturating the area. Any movement sensed by the lasers would be registered on a computer. You've seen the stick figure images on TV. That is the SLS camera at work. Their SLS camera kept picking up beings moving around the village. At the end of the investigation, the researchers went to load up their equipment. As they approached their vehicles, they noticed there were a bunch of small handprints, like 10 to 12-year-olds had touched the sides, leaving handprints in the dust. The original idea had been to show the folks living in the area there was nothing to fear in the village. After finding so much paranormal activity, they could only tell people the spirits were there, but not harmful. Having found a real live haunted village, the local government had an idea. If people didn't want to live in the village, maybe folks would like to visit. They turned the place into a tourist attraction. They have ghost hunts and walking tours. You can spend the night if you're brave enough. Rakshasas were most often depicted as shape-shifting, fierce-looking, enormous, monstrous-looking creatures with fangs protruding from their mouths and sharp claw-like fingernails. They're shown as being mean, growling beasts and insatiable man-eaters that could smell the scent of human flesh. Some of the more vicious ones were shown with flaming red eyes and hair, drinking the blood of their victims, either using their hands or using a human skull. Some of these creatures could fly, or they would vanish from sight in an instant. They had magical powers of illusion, which enabled them to change size at will, and they could assume the form of any creature. To catch their intended victims off guard, the Rakshasa could take on the appearance of someone well liked by their intended meal. Why do I like this beast so much? William Lyle Richardson is why. Back when I was young, there was a TV show, Kolchak, the Night Stalker. In 1974 to 75, Carl Kolchak was a reporter in Chicago. He was not much of a hero, but he always took on the most interesting and bizarre creatures. Vampires, werewolves, mummies, the Paramorphe, and the Rakshasa. As an actor, William Lyle Richardson became Darren McGavin. In the last episode, Darren McGavin's wife has him arrested. You didn't know that? The last episode was called The Sentry. A giant lizard is killing people in an underground storage facility. Kathy Brown, Darren McGavin's wife in real life, plays Lieutenant Irene Lamont. Like just about every police official in every episode, she has him handcuffed, but then she turns him over to the military, or at least a bunch of guys that must be military. Being a young guy interested in all things paranormal, the show got me to looking into the creatures that Carl went up against, to see just how accurate the writers were. They did a pretty good job. I have all the episodes on DVD now, and I watch them from time to time. In the world of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, Rakshasas were a populous race. Not popular, populous. There were both good and evil Rakshasas. As warriors, they fought alongside the armies of both good and evil. They were powerful warriors, expert magicians, and illusionists. As shape changers, they could assume different physical forms. As illusionists, they were capable of creating appearances which were real to those who believed in them or who failed to dispel them. Some of the Rakshasas were said to be man-eaters, and they made their gleeful appearance when the slaughter on a battlefield was at its worst. Occasionally, they served as rank-and-file soldiers in the service of one or another warlord. The stories of the Rakshasas tell about the thousands of creatures that used to roam the earth. A few were notable enough to have entire chapters on them written. Some were called heroes, while most were downright villains. I guess it would depend on which side of the war these creatures were on. Just this year, 2021, a northern Indian village recalls a recent encounter with a monster. It started with howls and screams coming from the darkness. The sounds grew louder, and the witness looked out the window to try seeing what was making these unearthly sounds. He said he saw what looked like a large, hair-covered creature on two legs running past his home. The witness said he lived on the southeast side of a small village and a few hundred people in northern India. The village is surrounded by a small forest. At around 2 a.m., he was awakened by the sounds of screams and howls, kind of a mixture. The only animals known to live in the area were dogs and wild boar. The witness looked out the window and spotted this huge hair-covered monster moving on two legs like a man. It was definitely no human being. This thing was about 300 feet away, running along the edge of the forest. It was like a half-man, half-wolf with silvery white hair. As the creature was closest to the window, it turned and looked towards the house. The witness thinks it was looking right at him. It went into the forest and the witness lost sight of it. The next day, others from the village said they had seen the beast as well, and one of the village elders said it was the Rakshasa. The elder also said if the Rakshasa had seen the witness, it might try to possess his soul. The others in the village said they had been hearing this screaming howls for months. When the sun sets in Chandan Nagar, people try to stay off the streets. Folks out walking have encounters with a little girl wearing a white dress and carrying a doll who, as she's walking, is giving off nasty, blood-curdling laugh. If she sees you looking at her, she runs at you screaming in an insane manner. The story goes she died in a mishap at a construction site in the area. Her spirit never left and still makes her presence known today. Most people living in the area lock their doors and close the windows at sundown. Sinhagad Fort, which translates as Lion's Fort, was named for General Tanaji Malasari, who fought like a lion to recapture the fort for King Shivaji. Over the years, the fort has been the site of a lot of battles fought by everyone who wanted to claim this part of India as their own. The fort sits on a hill overlooking Pune, Pune. Many people who have visited the fort have reported hearing faint cries of people as if fighting during a battle. Tourists are not the only ones hearing these sounds. The villagers who live close to the fort often hear the sounds of battle being fought in the early hours of the morning. Having hundreds of soldiers die in battle may have left behind residual hauntings for folks to encounter. A bus full of kids ran off the road nearby, killing everyone on board. People visiting the fort say they have seen kids walking along the road where the bus crashed. The witnesses said as soon as they saw these kids, they would vanish. India has the largest film industry in the world by the number of films produced every year. Every year it produces more than 2,000 films in 20 different languages. Built in 1996, and Hyderabad is the world's biggest integrated film city. A thrilling experience not only as a tourist spot, but as a paranormal location as well. The 1,600-plus acre studio complex in Hyderabad is visited by 1.5 million tourists every year. The folks there to make movies have had encounters while waiting for their screen time. The green room, places to sit and relax between takes, have some kind of otherworldly presence. A green room may have come from scene room, a term used in some theaters to describe the backstage waiting area or dressing room. People report getting pushed from behind, only to find there's no one there. They also hear faint conversations in empty rooms. Having their costumes ripped is a common occurrence. Many say these are the spirits of production crew that died while filming or working on sets. Other witnesses credit the ghosts as being the soldiers who died in a bloody battle fought years ago right where the studio sits today. In 1843, troops of the East India Company, yes, an import-export company with their own army, clashed with the Tanpur Mirs of Sindh. The locals had a 20,000-man army, but they were fighting against just 3,000 British soldiers. The British had better weapons, better training, as well as artillery. They destroyed the opposition, driving the survivors away, and took control of Hyderabad for their company. At one time, East India Company had a bigger army than the British Empire. The Shamshabad airport of Hyderabad sits about 15 miles from town, and it is also haunted. Many of the bodies from the 1843 battle were buried where the airport was built. Both passengers and pilots have seen men in uniform standing on the runway during takeoff and landing. Several slight accidents have been credited with ghosts being seen, causing the pilots to react and run off of the runway. The ghost of Taramati is seen around the Golconda Fort in Hyderabad. Taramati lived back during the reign of Abdullah Qutub Shah from 1626 to 1672. She was his favorite lady of negotiable affections. The Taramati Garden was built for her. A music hall sits there today. Folks who are in and around the hall at night report hearing someone dancing in the empty hall. They also hear voices coming from the empty building, and they have seen shadowy figures moving about. There's a graveyard in Hyderabad, Banjara Hills on Road 12. Those who take that path have often complained of paranormal experiences of varying levels. Some suddenly discover that their lights turn off or completely go out. Others have 4 flat tires all at one time. When they have the tires repaired, there's no hole, there's no puncture, there's no nail. Just all of the air has suddenly escaped. Several people passing by have reported a sudden temperature drop while they're traveling on Road 12. There's a haunted house in Hyderabad. Well, there's a lot of haunted houses, but there's one that is best known. Curious teens and brave folks from all around the city go there to experience paranormal activity. Most visitors simply walk up to the fence, take a few photos, and then leave. Other, more foolhardy, will jump the fence and try to enter the building. Some are trying to show how brave they are, while others want to actually see or feel something from the other side. The story behind the haunting says, back in the old days, a mother and her 2 daughters lived in the house. They were known for not going outside or visiting any neighbors or any of the stores. Folks would see the 3 standing, looking out a window, or sometimes out on the balcony. No one ever interacted with them. One night, a man decided to break in and steal what he could. He watched the house to see if anyone was home, and then he snuck in through a window. Inside, he found the decomposing bodies of 3 women. They had been dead for about 6 months. No one could figure out how they had died, if anyone had killed them, or why they had been so reclusive. The visitors today are all trying to catch sight of one, if not all 3 women. Aside from eerie feelings and shadows, no one has encountered the women yet. Folks visiting Hyderabad can stay in one of the dozens of hotels offering accommodations for just about any pay scale. People have found ancient looking text written on the fog on the mirrors. Doors close on their own, and locks will unlock themselves. Voices are heard coming from empty rooms, and people see shadow beings in just about every part of every hotel in the city. I hope you enjoyed tonight's show. I probably butchered a lot of the words and names. I have a hard enough time with English. If you enjoyed the show, let me know. Let others know as well. Tell folks what they're missing. It'll give you something to talk about over lunch or dinner or just a cup of coffee. If you have a story for my next book or you have a suggestion for one of the shows, you can contact me at strangethings@arkanasa.com. Until next Saturday, this is Chris James.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?